All right, welcome to game 2 on Hardwire now. In the top right, we have Psystorm's GuMiho up 1. And in the bottom left, it is the blue Terran Byun for Shopify Rebellion. He will be participating in Katowice, probably the week of this video being released. We do expect big things from Byun, but here he is down a game against GuMiho. GuMiho being far more fresh off the military. He's a couple months out of the military, and Byun is probably like a year at this point. I haven't actually kept too much track, but Byun's been back for a while. GuMiho, I want to say late last year, like November, October, something like that. Could probably check into this. It's not super important though, because really what I'm trying to get to is that GuMiho had a very quick rise back to a familiar skill level for him. He is back to competing against the top tier Koreans, occasionally surprising us by beating the really solid top tier Koreans, and just being an overall fun guy to watch. So while one player, Byun, has a little bit more time to say that, hey, I've been practicing a little bit more, I've been deeper into the meta for a bit longer, so, okay, fine. I don't actually think it really matters. Evidence, GuMiho's up 1. And TvT as a whole has not really changed very much since Legacy of the Void, and yeah, I mean, you could even argue that TvT at its fundamentals hasn't changed much since StarCraft 2 was released. It is a bit different in StarCraft 1. There's no marine tank, it's just mech, straight up mech. But since StarCraft 2 released, it's a lot of marine tank. The openers are far different. Raven emphasis is very important, and some Terrans have really struggled getting a handle on that compared to previous metas, where honestly Ravens weren't even really a thing as an opener. But GuMiho has not been sweating, because Legacy of the Void and the Raven, let's call it dominance, Raven openers being the most basic, standard, safe, successful opener that you have, has been around for years at this point. So even longer than these guys have spent in the military, actually. So they're not coming back to brand new things. If this was a new expansion, when either one of these guys got back, then we're talking about a very different scenario. There's tons of things that they have to get used to. Not so here. What's really cool about both of these guys is that I do think they're on relatively equal skill levels for TvT. They also are the type of players to really push Terran in different directions. A lot of Terran players will kind of find the backbone of Terran build order, the one that works, again, very solid, very well, gives them the flexibility to get into that mid and late game, and then they'll just say, that's it, I'm good, I have the thing, I have the build. And that's all fair and good as long as you're not a pro gamer participating in best ofs against other worldwide or either world-renowned Terrans. It's not so good if you are facing them. So you got to change it up, and these two guys do change it up quite a bit. As I was pointing out in the last game, Byun, he likes his medevac drops, which, while not totally out of nowhere, just whoa, so weird, is still something that's a little odd compared to, again, the very standard Raven openers. And GuMiho, well, he's the type of player to actually throw in mech, even when we're not in a mech-dominant era. He also can do his own drops. I mean, actually, a lot of the times, these two could be very similar. We're hitting the exact same build orders so far, which is why I've been glossing over their actual build orders. They have not been of much importance yet. It's very similar on the openings. GuMiho tad behind in the SCV production, but 2 Reapers, 1 Cyclone. Second Cyclone on the way now for Byun, so that's a little bit slower, very, very, very close. But all coming down to the fact that they are going to send medevacs to each other. What can't be the most important thing in this scenario is who is able to identify the build and who isn't. Reapers come in for Byun and they scout no add-on to the starport. That's a big tell right there. Sure, GuMiho got a Viking last game, and he could be doing it again here. I'd say it's a bit less likely than him just going for his own medevac. GuMiho, he did get into the main base. He saw the starport building. He didn't actually see if there was an add-on, so he doesn't know that a drop could be on its way. Now, it's not a drop, but it does have a medevac for a little bit more micro, and that could be a difference maker, although it looks like at the beginning of it, oh my god, the micro from both sides. All right, that actually turned around on Byun 100%. So at the beginning of it, it looked like Byun, okay, well, I guess it actually didn't look so great for Byun, but then he was able to micro, but then GuMiho came in with the medevac and his Marines, and yes, it did absolutely turn favorable for GuMiho as far as the army supply goes, but it looks like maybe GuMiho, affording the third Cyclone, I believe it was, yes, so the third Cyclone might have put him behind on the SCV count. He might have actually been skipping SCV production to do what he did, and it's not paid off in that effect. You know, like the fact that he had a slight army supply lead as he just gets super hardcore denied here. It didn't actually result in anything really important. He didn't hit the economy. He didn't hit the production. He just got pushed back so easily. And that means that his temporary power supply, army supply does not matter. What matters far more is that Byun has been working with about 4 to 5 more SCVs for the last 30 seconds. And is going to keep that lead by the looks of things, although GuMiho is playing a very strong stance here for third base on location. It's because he knows he has the scouting, he has the control over the game, even though his first drop did not go super, super hot. His second drop trying to make up for that a little bit. Now this, I think, did overstay its welcome. Yes, it did. Only able to pick up one of those Cyclones. Lost the second medevac, though. GuMiho, I think, really overstaying his welcome. If he had picked up with all 2 medevacs worth of units and then had this tank up here, I mean, Byun has his own 2 tanks and it doesn't, you know, probably get too far. It does, I think, become more of an annoyance. This third CC is continuing to be bombarded. It's, you know, the SCVs are getting picked off, you know, all that type of stuff. But instead, GuMiho lost a lot of the units. His follow-up attack with tank really is, you know, unimportant. Byun did pull SCVs, though. He did pull SCVs. So 8 SCVs died in the making of that defense. GuMiho takes a slight supply lead there as far as the SCVs. Loses a bit of that army. But unless you're having a real snowball effect, unless you're actually killing so many units, usually it comes down to who has the stronger economy as the game gets into mid and late game. But okay, that's just changed. That changed pretty hardcore. Byun's drop, very successful. 14 SCVs go down. And while, yes, that killed a lot of his army, I mean, it actually doesn't even put him that far below in the army supply. In fact, he's still ahead. And he killed 14 SCVs. So a 7 worker lead for Byun. GuMiho was pumping 3 CCs worth of SCVs on location, didn't have to lift it, didn't have to wait for the orbital and then lift it, right? He's also been calling down mules on it too, so there is a reason why GuMiho has not fallen behind by 14 SCVs. He nonetheless now falls behind the economy game, so it's been a bit back and forth. There are some pretty significant spikes, though, for both players. So don't just look at the actual, like, you know, woo, that's high, woo, that's low. Look at the numbers to the side of it, too. And they're pretty big spikes, right? A whole 1,000 minerals more than GuMiho right there for Byun when he got those SCVs. And that does have, like, a little bit of a trickle effect, you know? Overall, in a 25-minute TvT from here on out, will that spike matter? Probably not. There's so many other things that are going to happen in this TvT that we won't remember the fact that for 20 seconds, Byun was mining 1,000 more minerals. But it does perhaps have, again, that trickle effect where, well, I had 1,000 more minerals at one point, which of course is faster barracks or faster engineering bays, or actually building all 5 Marines at once off of 3 barracks. Thus, I was able to do a drop and push you, and that drop really hits you hard, you know? There's absolutely ways for Byun to continue holding this lead. There's also ways for him to lose the lead. GuMiho is trying his best to cover all of his bases, literally. In fact, this actually can be kind of a downside. What GuMiho is doing here is not actually considered all that great. He's basically too spread out. But I guess it's gonna be okay. I thought I saw a medevac of Byun. Did he die? I think he might have died. Some went to the right side. Maybe it was just that Marine. Anyways, the GuMiho's tank spread would be really impressive if it was 4 tanks every which way we looked. But right now, if Byun were to come in from this angle, for instance, see that there's only 1 tank, he pounces on that. Sees another tank, he pounces on that. Sees this tank, he pounces on that. So GuMiho needs some coverage for those tanks, but all of his coverage put into 2 medevacs, for the most part anyways. So I think what he's actually hoping is that Byun kind of runs face first into one of the tank fires, and then says, oh, a tank, and then pulls back, not even really realizing that they might not be properly protected. A lot of map presence being gained right now. GuMiho trying to kill a supply depot. Byun actually wants to keep that alive for further scouting. Upgrade startup for both players around the same exact time, what is a very, very big difference, though. And I think a direct result of Byun's economic lead after that drop is that he has a much faster 4th command center on location, turning into a planetary as I speak, with tanks covering it too. And these tanks are kind of covering each other a little bit better than GuMiho's situation back at home. So while one fires now, the second one joins in pretty shortly. Third one is, you know, if it was alone, if all 3 tanks were alone, might have been droppable. The Marines are there. GuMiho even misclicks for the medevacs for that second, and only one gets to survive to the dead space. So GuMiho at this point has fallen a fair bit behind just because that 4th command center so far back. But it looks like this is one of those TvTs where both of them are going to get maxed out. So I'm really not worried about GuMiho dying. Well, maybe I spoke too soon. Dying necessarily. This is where, you know, if Maru was in the same position, there's a reason why we give Maru so much credit in TvT. Even though he's down 30 supply, and that, you know, is still considerable, even with tanks trying to cover it. The trick is having all of your units in the right position. So if your tanks are too spread out and you're down 30 supply, well, you probably just die. If all of your tanks are in the exact right position, they will 100% cover 30 supply. They might even cover 50 supply if they're all protecting each other, all using a choke to their advantage, so on and so forth. What Byun wants to do to make sure that he actually keeps the lead and ends the game in his favor is to get to the air swap, which is something he's already done. So he's leading the Viking War 9-4. Does have a rather haphazard engagement in the middle of the map. GuMiho's tanks properly positioned. GuMiho properly engaging the army kind of ahead of time in a way, right? The worst thing you can do in a lot of StarCraft games is simply say, I guess I'm behind. I guess I die. And then just turtle very close to your chest. And though that means that while you might have protect this planetary, for instance, for a short amount of time, you are ultimately contained. And you do not want to be contained in StarCraft, in TvT. It's a almost worst case scenario. Finding himself a little out of position. Wait, this is actually a very interesting fight. This is kind of an odd one. Okay, so GuMiho was a little out of position. Byun really wanted to hit the east. There you go, the east side. So he actually... It looked good initially for Byun, but not enough of his army got into a good enough position to take advantage of GuMiho's army being misplaced. So he tries to use his Marines, but he didn't actually have Marine advantage. The upgrades had finished very close to each other. That Byun just kind of running the way that he did off to the right side meant, sure, that GuMiho's tanks weren't engaging, but neither were Byun's tanks. So it really was just Marine versus Marine, but one player had a little bit more of that kind of defender's advantage. I mean, literally going to be reinforcing faster. That is defender's advantage. I mean, it made the fight very not tank heavy, despite having so many tanks. This fight absolutely tank heavy. GuMiho thinks he's found an opening, seeing that tanks were on siege. I don't know if that was necessarily true. If he was able to grab one tank and then skedaddle with 90% of his Marine force left over, well, that is a win, but he lost so many of his Marines, dangerously close to losing his tanks, as well as Byun realizes, hey, maybe I can just go ahead and drop on top of those. What GuMiho is doing well as is going on is handling what looks to be a drop in the main base, but also continuing to expand, despite being under a lot of pressure and knowing that he's probably just straight up behind. He probably knows that he has less supply than his opponent because it's 13 minutes into the game, almost 14, and he's not maxed out. And he has been the one under pressure, whereas Byun, very little has been done to Byun in the past couple of minutes. So Byun is maxed out. Byun does have his own 5th base up, is trying to get to a 6th as well, and GuMiho is the one playing the catch-up game. But if he had, again, just played turtle, play scared, play hesitant, then he falls even further behind. So trying to expand, trying to engage Byun's army far enough away from his command centers that he could still save them at the last second. That's what you want to do as GuMiho. But Byun is about to find him too out of position, finally actually digs in to this location, and with that many tanks firing with the planetary, it's not exactly salvageable. You can see what GuMiho thinks so, And I love this maneuver. He tries to bring the tanks to the right side, hoping that Byun won't scan, while actually taking the majority of his army off to the left. Going to get a quick kill on Byun's potential 7th, but Byun, I think, identified what was happening. He left the tanks and then pulled back home with what he had left over. Is it going to be enough, however? The upgrades are done for GuMiho. 3-3 versus 2-2 is insane. Even though a lot of Marines were painted orange thanks to Byun's anti-armor missile, the upgrade difference is just so huge. The problem now for GuMiho is that he still has the orange painted on him, and he's running into the Terran's defender's advantage. Byun's defender's advantage might start kicking in with the tanks still rallying forward. These two tanks adding a lot to the engagement. One more tank comes out. The auto turret comes out, trying to hold a good focus fire there from GuMiho at the last second. He still has so many tanks left over, but his Marine count is getting awfully low, and Byun is returning with much needed tanks. GuMiho is making this quite a fight, but Byun he's hanging on. He knows that he killed a base, so he really wants to hope that he can hold back at home. And I think he will. I think he will. The tanks and the Marines finally coming forward. He had been balling up Marines at home, trying to get enough to actually overwhelm GuMiho's army. It finally works out. There's a little touch and go there for a second. But as I said, Byun knew that he killed one base, so the fact that he had his own base have to be lifted is not that big of a deal. Yes, this one died too, I suppose, so it was actually kind of a 1-for-2 trade in a sense, but it still means that Byun is in the lead ever so slightly. What was really problematic in that engagement was just not having quite enough to deal with tanks, and then not having those upgrades. That's why I didn't have enough to support the tanks in the high ground like it was. His Marines having, what, 15 seconds later on those upgrades was a huge deal. So GuMiho was able to get a victory there. I mean, he did ultimately make a very smart move with the little... It wasn't a run by, but the counterattack, right? What he probably should have done was let the planetary go. And that is totally hindsight 2020. You cannot blame GuMiho for trying to save that, thinking that he could, thinking that he should. You know, that makes sense. But it kind of sucks to look back on and you go, you know what? If I just given that planetary up, I'd save 20 SCVs and I'd save, was like 4 tanks, I think? Which is obviously a big difference maker. But that's really cool about this game. Everything kind of evens out. Again, it was kind of a 1-for-2 trade. GuMiho got 2 bases denied, shall we say, but this orbital actually lived, so it is back to mining. And GuMiho didn't just lose his planetary, and that's that. He just, he's down a base. He actually had 2 more going. What I was pointing out before, that kind of almost base trade right there, and I don't know if Byun realizes that, okay, he does... He even knows that that's a planetary, but there's only so much that he can do without pulling his entire army over to that left side. Now, this is exactly what he can do, actually. He can drop Marines behind the mineral line, especially without high-sec auto-tracking. But GuMiho, quick to respond, also trying to push to the right side. Now, this is scanned by Byun. Just good game sense right there. And oh, no, GuMiho's not scanning ahead. GuMiho's not scanning ahead. Oh, my God, the tank fire. Oh, my God, GuMiho. Oh, he had no idea he was running into so many tanks. Oh, no. I mean, if there was half the tanks, if there was no tanks, obviously, then GuMiho's fine. But the fact that he loses all of his army there, plus has to deal with this, I mean, maybe he could have, but he would have lost so much momentum. He would have once again been pinned back on his side of the map and continuing to lose out in the TvT. So he just taps out right then and there. But oof, that is painful. That happens in TvT, though, so we get a tied-up series 1-1. Let's head into Game 3.